Hello grade 8s and welcome to the answer series Natural Sciences videos based on our study guides. This video revises the important content on photosynthesis that we have covered so far by working through an example of a typical exam question. The question reads, the diagram below shows various magnifications of a leaf and its microscopic structures that are involved in an important chemical process that occurs only in plants. So in our introduction, we already have a number of hints and things that are important for us to unpack this question. Firstly, it tells us that we're looking at a leaf and various microscopic structures, things that are not seen with the naked eye, zooming into it. Also, it tells us that these structures are involved in a chemical process that occurs only in plants. And the only chemical process you've learnt of thus far that only occurs in plants is photosynthesis. If we unpack the diagram a bit, we can see that it shows us a leaf. There's something coming in from the air into the leaf. Then number 2 at the bottom says that it's moving up from the soil. Number 3 and 4 is moving out of the leaf, where number 3 is released into the air. And number 4 says that it's moving down the leaf and transported to the rest of the plant. Then in the first microscopic magnification, we can see a number of plant cells, and it's indicating a structure W. Zooming in on one of the little dots inside the plant cells, it shows us an organelle number X. Pause the video here and look at the questions 1 to 5, trying to answer them yourself before we work through them. Right, now we're going to move into the questions and answers. Question 1 says, define the term microscopic. So this is something that you would have to learn as it is a definition, and something is microscopic when it is too small to be seen with the naked eye. Question 2, name the chemical process that is being referred to in this question. As we've already stated in the introduction of this question, it talks about an important chemical process that occurs only in plants. You can also recognize the organelle number X as a chloroplast, and both of these should be a hint to you that the answer to number 2 is photosynthesis. Question 3. Identify the 2 reactants 1 and 2 required for the chemical process in question 2. So we can see that number 1 comes in from the air, which means that it's a gas, and number 2 moves up from the soil. From the content you've studied for photosynthesis, it is clear that number 1 therefore is carbon dioxide, and number 2 is water. Question 4. List 2 other substances that are required for this chemical process to take place. From the content we've discussed, we know that there are 2 reactants to photosynthesis that help to activate the process even though they don't directly take part in it. And that is the radiant energy or light energy from the sun, as well as chlorophyll inside the chloroplasts. Question 5. Identify organelle X. If we look at this organelle, we notice a number of stacked membranes inside of it that look like a bunch of coins stacked on top of one another, and that is a typical structure of a chloroplast. Name the substance that is found inside organelle X that helps to activate this chemical process. As we've already decided in a previous question that one of the reactants required for photosynthesis is chlorophyll. And if you remember the difference between chlorophyll and chloroplast, the chlorophyll fills the chloroplast. So that is the pigment found inside of this organelle. Identify the products 3 and 4. From the chemical equation we learned for photosynthesis, we know that it releases a gas into the air called oxygen, and it produces glucose as food in plants. So number 3 is the oxygen being released into the atmosphere, and number 4 is glucose. Product 4 can be stored as starch. Name 2 other things that can happen to product 4 in the plant. So from the content we've discussed, we know that the glucose produced, what happens to it, depends on the plant's needs. One thing is that it can be stored as starch, but as that is given in the question, we must think of the other things that can happen to the glucose. It can be converted into other substances, like, for example, cellulose, proteins, or fats and oils. It can also be used as energy immediately. Because the question says only name 2 other things in the plant, you only need to mention briefly what happens instead of explaining what these things are for. So you don't need to elaborate on how cellulose is used for strength and support. Also note that because the question specifically asks for 2 things that can happen to the product for, only the first 2 answers will be marked in an exam question. If you look at the memo, it says that you can provide any 2 of these things that could happen to glucose, but very importantly, the marker will only give you marks for the first 2 that you have listed. So make sure that your first 2 answers are the ones you are most certain of. Why is product 4 stored as starch in plants? In other words, why is it starch? What is so special about starch that makes it a good thing to be stored, a good structure to be stored? And if you remember from the video on starch, we said that it is a stable, insoluble molecule, which means that it can store well or it can store for longer. The plant will be able to put it aside in a little box, and wait until it's ready to use the starch. Whereas if it was glucose, which is a soluble molecule, most of it would dissolve before the plant gets around to using it. So starch's properties, large, stable, and insoluble, means that it makes it a good storage molecule. Name the indicator that is used to test for the presence of starch. And from our video, you should know that that is iodine solution. Identify structure W. Now, structure W is showing you one of the individual plant cells inside of this magnified picture. So that is a single cell or a single plant cell, the microscopic structure that makes up all living things. During an experiment to test a leaf for starch, the leaf is placed in boiling water for 2 minutes. Explain how this step affects structure W and why it is a necessary step. So to answer this question, we have to remember what the function of the cell wall is as mentioned in the video on the testing for starch. The cell wall is a protective barrier around the plant cell, keeping everything inside. The whole point of boiling the leaf was to soften the leaf cells. And that means that we're basically breaking down this barrier, this brick wall around the cell so that we can get to the contents on the inside. So in the process of boiling the leaf, we are breaking down the cell walls, and therefore it makes the cell permeable to the chemicals that we're going to be adding. The alcohol can get into the cell and remove the chlorophyll. The iodine can get into the cell and react with the starch so that we can see the color change. In another step of this experiment, the alcohol is added. So explain why the alcohol is added. The alcohol is responsible for extracting the chlorophyll from the leaf. And the whole point of taking the chlorophyll out is because we want to make the leaf white. Now, why is that essential? If you put the iodine onto the green leaf, it might be very difficult to see a color change in that indicator clearly. So by taking out the green pigment, it makes the leaf nice and white so that if you drop the indicator on it, you can clearly see the color change from the brownish yellow to the blue-black in the presence of starch. Lastly, describe one precaution when working with alcohol in the experiment. And if you remember, we said that we have to heat the alcohol through an indirect method called a water bath. And the reason for this is that it is highly flammable, so you can't really work with alcohol over an open flame. And there you have it, an example of a typical exam question with some low order, middle order, and higher order questions. If you found this video useful, give it a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new episodes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook to stay on top of the latest TAS news and launches. So that's it for now from the Answer Series, your key to exam success.